Hi everybody, I just wanted to make a quick video about this whole Raja Jackson situation. A lot of people are talking about it, but there are some details that I think really ought to be interjected into the discussion that I just don't hear anybody talking about. So let me start out that absolutely nothing in the world actually justifies Raja Jackson's assault on Syko Stu. No, that's a bunch of horse shit. And to me, the worst part of it is the detail that he was actually allowed to leave that ring under his own power. You know, there were times in the pro wrestling industry that is something that absolutely would not have happened. If you jumped into the ring and you basically attacked an active competitor, those guys would fuck you up. And in proportion to what Jackson actually did to Syko Stu, I would suggest that they should have fucked him up pretty badly. But so far, for the most part, he's gotten away with it. So if anybody isn't aware of this situation and what happened, basically, Raja Jackson, who is the son of Quentin Rampage Jackson, former UFC light heavyweight champion of the world, he was attending a pro wrestling event somewhere, and I don't recall off the top of my head exactly where. Apologize for that. But he went backstage, and he had a bunch of cameras with him. Apparently, he's a pretty big Twitch or Kick streamer. I'm not sure exactly which of the two it is. I'm not. I really ought to know that for it, but anyway, I don't consider it to be an especially important detail. So while he was backstage at this event, one of the wrestlers saw him. They saw all of the cameras that were on him, and they decided that they wanted to do a little bit of work with him. So the guy got up, walked up to him, took a beer can, and basically did a stunt where he smashed that beer can against Jackson's head. Now, he did it in the way that you were taught to do that, so you can do it somewhat safely, causing the other person a minimum of pain and injury. And so, yeah, he had to be basically informed that Raja Jackson is not a professional wrestler, that he wasn't there as a worker, in the pro wrestling parlance. And basically at that point, the guy apologized to him multiple times. Jackson accepted his apology, they shook hands, and then they kind of went away from each other. And then later on throughout the day, various people kind of got in Jackson's ear, and they gassed him up, and they gassed him up, and they gassed him up, and eventually it ends up in that assault, which, as I am going to stipulate again right now, it's absolutely unacceptable. That is bullshit. Nothing in the world makes that okay. Nothing in the world should keep this guy out of jail. And it's an absolute travesty that he hasn't been arrested and gone to jail yet. Now, something that I am going to say that really needs to be part of this discussion, whether people like to hear it or not, Syko Stu also fucked up in that exchange. And there is so much wrong also with what he did. And I think maybe a lot of people are going to call it victim blaming. It's not really victim blaming, because this isn't something that makes the assault on him okay. But he did something, and I can't even begin to imagine how an actual trained wrestler would think that this is a good idea to do. And he just saw somebody come backstage with a bunch of cameras, and he just said, oh, okay, I'm going to go do some work with this guy. And he doesn't know who this guy is. He doesn't know if he has any kind of training. So you don't do that. You don't just go and jump on a random guy and do something on camera and then expect him to sell it, and then expect him to understand what it is that you're doing. He's not in the business. He doesn't know. He doesn't know how to do that safely with you. And so this actually kind of sends my mind back to an incident that happened in pro wrestling history. It's a pretty notorious one. There is an episode of Dark Side of the Ring about this, and this is something that is referred to as the mass transit incident. And so this was something that happened all the way back in the 1990s. It happened with Extreme Championship Wrestling. So that was Paul Heyman's outfit. for anybody who might not know that. But if you know who Paul Heyman is, then you know what ECW was. But anyway, they were a hardcore wrestling outfit, and they were on a very shaky foundation pretty much at all times. And sometimes they just had to put shows together with whatever talent that they could find that they could get to show up. And so one day, this guy presents himself at the show, and he says that he's a trained wrestler. And he says that he's 18, and he says that his wrestling name is Mass Transit. And so it just so happens that night that Paul Heyman needs an opponent for a guy by the name of New Jack. New Jack passed away a couple of years ago. He's not a guy that I have any amount of respect for as a performer. It's very lowest common denominator, and honestly extremely unprofessional, dangerous. And I think that if this industry functioned the way that it was supposed to function, a veteran would have basically ended that guy's career a good long time before he hurt as many people as he did. And this is another one of those incidents. And so, they decide that they're going to give this guy a match with New Jack. But he goes to them and he says that he doesn't know how to blade. And so blading was this thing that pro wrestlers, well, in some places they still do it, and in some places they don't. But basically they have a razor blade. And it's wrapped in tape and it's concealed in the trunks. And then at the time when they want to get some color, so when they want to bleed on camera, or just bleed for the sake of the match, you know, they take out this razor and they kind of do it in such a way that the crowd can't see them, but they cut themselves. So he doesn't know how to do this, which in a promotion such as ECW, you know, that definitely should have been like a prerequisite. If you don't know how to blade, you're not going to work for this outfit, regardless. So they agree that he's going to do the match and that New Jack is going to help him blade. Huge mistake. Because New Jack, basically, he cuts this kid so deep, the amount that he bleeds, he goes to the hospital, he almost dies. And so that was the story of the mass transit incident. And that tells you one particular thing that is an absolute necessity if you are a pro wrestler, if you are running a pro wrestling promotion, and that is that you don't work with people that you don't know. You definitely don't work with people that are untrained. You don't work with people that you don't know are trained, but you don't work with people that you don't know. And you don't try to work with people that you don't know. Because there's a certain amount of, well, actually, there's a lot of trust that goes along with working in professional wrestling. You have to be able to trust the person that you're working with, and they have to be able to trust you. And in this particular incident, it is pretty obvious Syko Stu could not trust Raja Jackson. He couldn't even trust him to continue along the lines of how he had accepted Syko Stu's apology and just let that be that. You know, at that point, let bygones be bygones in the wonderful tradition of Daniel LaRusso. Let bygones be bygones. He couldn't do it. And so what he did was he jumped into the ring to claim something that professional wrestlers often refer to as a receipt. And apparently there was a wrestler that was present at this show who said to him, hey, you know, you get a receipt. And so basically what it means is like, he hit you, you get to hit him back. And a receipt in professional wrestling, you know, it functions in a lot of different ways. But what it basically comes down to is that the existence of receipts disincentivizes guys from working unsafely. Disincentivizes guys from hitting their opponent for real. Well, opponent is obviously, you know, a very loose term in this context. But it disincentivizes them from hitting their co-worker for real. That's a better way to phrase it. And it incentivizes them to work safely. And so Syko Stu, what he basically did was he took a liberty with somebody that he had no idea who this person was. He can't really sit there and say that, oh, I was just trying to work an angle, because nobody has arranged that. Keep in mind, everybody knows this, that a huge part of what goes on with professional wrestling hinges on the detail that it's all prearranged. You are going to work with this guy. You have discussed it with his people. He's discussed it with your people. You're probably working for the same people. You probably have the same people. But it's all been worked out in advance. It's prearranged. They know what you're going to do. You know what you're going to do. You know what he's going to do. And everybody's agreed to it. And in this particular instance, there was no level of consent present in that. And that is an incredibly unprofessional way for a wrestler to work. That's an incredibly unsafe way for a wrestler to work. Because keep in mind, the stunt that they did with the beer can, it basically kind of hinges on you take the beer can, you crack it first, and then when you hit the other person with the beer can, all of the fluid is going to come out, and it's going to look like the thing basically exploded. You could never actually do that in real life, with an uncracked beer can. You would be smoking that guy quite a bit before this thing actually exploded the way that you wanted it to. And Stu even did actually cover Jackson's head with his hand, before he hit him with the can. And so he even gave him a level of protection. But the fact is that a stunt like that, there's a safe way to do it to somebody, and there's a safe way to receive it. Now, it looks like Syko Stu had a pretty good picture of how to do that stunt safely on somebody, but Jackson had no idea how to receive it safely. He had no idea how to have that stunt done on him safely. And he's sitting here, he's looking at this guy, and it's literally the first time that you have ever seen this guy in your entire life. And you just jump up and do that. That is a huge mistake. In the traditions of pro wrestling, yeah, Syko Stu, he had a receipt coming to him. But definitely not being dropped on his head and then punched something like, I think the count is something like 23 times. Punched 23 times in the head while he's already unconscious, by a professional MMA fighter. And, there are a lot of very tough pro wrestlers in the history of pro wrestling. There's a lot of tough guys in that industry working at any given time. There are guys who probably could have taken on, a guy with the level of training that Raja Jackson has. Obviously, Syko Stu was not one of them. I understand that he's an Army vet, that he started wrestling so that he could overcome his post-traumatic stress syndrome from having served overseas. And, I respect all of that. But, he's not Haku. Or anybody who knows, what I'm talking about in terms of, actual, legitimately tough professional wrestlers. He's not Haku. He's not Bob Holly. He's not Steve Blackman. Any of these guys that are famous for their toughness and their ability to, to dish out punishment in a street fight. He's not any of those guys. And so he's probably not the kind of guy who would ever actually, legitimately, intentionally step up to a guy like Raja Jackson intending to actually fight him. And so that's really a huge part of what makes the assault so grotesque, right? Is that it was done on a guy who wasn't looking for it. He was very quickly rendered defenseless. And it was over what at that point really ought to have been considered nothing. It wasn't nothing the whole time. When Syko Stu got up and he did that the first time, it was definitely, that's a problem. That's a problem. And the detail that obviously he was never taught better than that, or at least never learned better than that, is also a problem. But he apologized. He apologized twice. They shook hands, they hugged it out, and they walked away from each other, and that was supposed to be the end of it. And Raja Jackson, he didn't allow that to be the end of it. Quentin Rampage Jackson himself, he didn't allow that to be the end of it, because he was one of the people that got in his son's ear and said, hey, you can't just take that. You got to go do something about it. apparently not having the slightest bit of sense in his head to understand that this was a pro wrestling show. And even if the other guy acts inappropriately, unprofessionally, and in this instance, yeah, unsafely, he wasn't actually doing that with the intention to disrespect anybody. He wasn't doing it with the intention to hurt anybody. And so there's absolutely, Raja Jackson had absolutely no right to go jump in that ring and do the thing that he did. And it is an absolute miscarriage of justice every second that this guy is allowed to walk free, as if like he didn't do anything wrong, and the only thing that was done that was wrong was that his cameraman that he took with him filmed it. And by the way, that is actually something that Raja Jackson has basically said. Get fucked, you little worm. There are a lot of people out there that expect you to be a lot better than that. But unfortunately, it does kind of seem like Rampage Jackson himself is not one of them. You know, he's people have uncovered comments that he made where he basically said that, like, so he's got kids from at least two different mothers. And he's got two kids that are just, you know, African American, black, however you might want to express it. And then he's got these kids who are, you know, half African American, half black, and half Asian. And he said that he's saving money for the half Asian kids, for the half Japanese kids to go to university, and he's saving money for to bail his two black sons out of jail. You know, that's the level of expectation that he has set for his kids as a father. And apparently that's the level of expectation that he set for himself in his own fatherhood. So yeah, he bears a huge amount of the responsibility for this. I think it's kind of a shame that the worst that can happen for him is that he's going to see his kid go to jail. Like, he'd better see his kid go to jail. He has to see his kid go to jail. But I don't think that we should pretend that Syko Stu didn't make any mistakes that contributed to this. Because he did. There's no two ways about it. If you are a professional wrestler, if you are an aspiring professional wrestler, this is not the kind of thing that you should ever do. Just go grab a random guy because he happens to be there and crack a beer can on his head, even if you're doing it, you know, with technique that is intended to make it safe. You just don't do it. Because you're not working with that guy. The first time that you see him, you're not working with that guy. You don't know who he is. You don't know if he's safe to work with, and he doesn't know if you're safe to work with. So even then, you don't do it. And unfortunately, you know, whether it's his fault or not, this is what this whole thing has come to. And so you're seeing two guys who have probably just ended their own careers. Well, rather, I should say one guy who's probably ended his career and one guy who's had his career ended for him. That's a huge price to pay for such a stupid mistake.